I want to tell you about the morning I stopped buying fuel. Not cut back, not reduced my dependence. Stopped. Completely. The last time I pulled into a gas station, filled up the old diesel truck, handed over cash that felt like it weighed twice what it should. That was the last time. And I didn't make some dramatic decision. I didn't plan it. I just found something. Something that had been sitting on a shelf in my grandfather's barn for longer than I've been alive. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name is Silas. I run about 40 acres out here in the hill country, some row crops, a small orchard, livestock on the back pasture. Nothing fancy. The kind of operation where you fix what breaks, build what you need, and buy as little as possible from people who don't know your name. My grandfather farmed this same land. His father before him. The land doesn't change much. The costs do. Last spring, fuel hit a number that made me sit down at the kitchen table and just stare at the wall for a while. Not because I couldn't cover it, because I could see exactly where it was going. Every year, a little higher. Every season, another reason. Pipeline something, refinery something, overseas something. The explanations change. The direction doesn't. And I'm out here running a tractor, 2 diesel trucks, a generator for the barn, and a pressure washer I use more than I'd like to admit. Fuel isn't a line item for me. It's the whole page. So I started looking. I'm not a complainer by nature. I'd rather spend an hour solving a problem than 10 minutes being angry about it. I went online. I read. I asked around at the co-op. And I kept bumping into the same thing over and over again in forums and old agriculture journals and obscure corners of the internet that nobody much visits anymore. 1 plant, 1 crop, 2 types of fuel. I want to say that again because it sounds like I'm overselling it, and I'm not. 1 plant produces 2 completely different fuels. 1 for diesel engines, 1 for gasoline engines. Seeds go one direction, stalks go another, and at the end of it, you're looking at fuel you grew yourself on your own land. The plant is industrial hemp, cannabis sativa if you want the full name. And before you close the tab, I know what you're thinking. I thought the same thing. But here's the number that changed my mind. 97%. That's the efficiency rating that the University of Connecticut published in 2010 when they processed hemp seed oil into biodiesel and ran it through a standard diesel engine. 97% conversion rate. That's not a hobbyist experiment. That's a university engineering department doing the math and publishing it. For context, petroleum diesel averages around 86% combustion efficiency under normal operating conditions. What they were measuring at Connecticut was better than what comes out of a pump. And here's the thing about industrial hemp that people get tangled up on. This is not marijuana. The 2 plants are the same species, the way a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are the same species. Industrial hemp contains less than 0.3% THC. It has about as much psychoactive effect as a head of broccoli. Since the 2018 Farm Bill passed, growing it is completely legal across the entire country. No special permit, no hoops. Farmers are already doing it in Kentucky, Colorado, Montana, and a dozen other states. What they're mostly growing it for right now is fiber, food, building materials. The fuel application is sitting right there, barely touched, which is a strange thing when you think about it. And I did think about it for a long time before I understood why. So here's how the fuel actually works, in plain language. You take the seeds, cold press them, and you get oil. Dense, dark, slightly nutty-smelling oil. That oil goes through a process called transesterification, which sounds complicated, but is basically just mixing the oil with methanol and lye in the right proportions, letting it react, and separating out the biodiesel from the glycerol byproduct. The glycerol is useful too, but that's a different conversation. The biodiesel you end up with runs in any unmodified diesel engine. Tractor, truck, generator, no conversion kit, no modifications. You just put it in and drive. The stalks are a different path. Hemp stalks are loaded with cellulose, something like 60 to 70% cellulose by dry weight. Cellulose can be broken down into sugars through a fermentation process, and those sugars become ethanol, fuel-grade ethanol. The kind that runs in flex fuel vehicles, small engines, and generators. One plant, two fuel streams, nothing wasted. Now, the number most people want to know. How much land does this actually require? 1 acre of industrial hemp produces roughly 20 gallons of biodiesel from the seeds alone. That's before you count the ethanol potential from the stalks. 20 gallons doesn't sound like a lot until you do the math on a small operation. I run my tractor maybe 300 hours a year. Good diesel tractor burns about 3 gallons an hour on hard work, maybe 1.5 at idle. That's somewhere between 450 and 900 gallons a season, depending on what I'm doing. I'm not going to pretend 2 acres covers my entire operation, but 5 acres changes the math considerably. And the hemp itself is a cash crop. You're not farming it at a loss to make fuel. I'm standing next to my truck right now with a container of oil I pressed last week. The engine started on the first turn. There's no bill coming. I need to tell you how I got here. Because it wasn't just the university study, and it wasn't just the math. It was a book I found on a shelf in my grandfather's barn, a book that turned out to be a lot older than me, about a world that was already being built before it got taken apart on purpose. That story starts in 1900 and it ends with something that was killed before it could live. Let me tell you about a man named Rudolf Diesel. Not the engine, the man. Because most people know the invention and have never thought once about the inventor, and that gap, that space between what we remember and what actually happened, is exactly where this story lives. Rudolf Diesel was a German engineer, precise and methodical, the kind of man who filled notebooks with calculations the way other men fill diaries with feelings. He spent years in the 1880s and 1890s working on an idea that everyone around him thought was impractical. An engine that would run on something other than steam, something more efficient, something that a farmer or a craftsman could actually afford to operate without a coal supply chain behind him. He built it. And in 1900, at the World Exhibition in Paris, he ran his engine on peanut oil. Not petroleum, not refined crude. Peanut oil pressed from peanuts, the same way you'd press any seed. The crowd standing around that engine couldn't hear a difference from the petroleum-powered machines beside it. Diesel said publicly, clearly on the record, and I found his original statement reprinted in an agricultural journal from 1902 sitting in a box in my grandfather's barn, that his engine was designed to run on vegetable oils, and that he believed this would allow farmers in any country to produce their own fuel from their own land, independent of any outside supplier. He wasn't being idealistic. He was being an engineer. He had run the numbers. 13 years later, in 1913, Rudolf Diesel boarded a mail ship called the Dresden, crossing the English Channel on his way to meet with the British Navy about his engine technology. He had dinner in the ship's dining room. He went to his cabin, and in the morning, he was gone. His body was found floating in the sea 10 days later. The official conclusion was suicide. I'm not here to tell you I know what happened on that ship. I don't. Nobody does, or at least nobody who's saying. What I can tell you is what happened after. Within a few years of his death, the industry standard for diesel engines quietly shifted to petroleum-based fuel. The infrastructure, the seed presses, the small-scale oil operations, the regional fuel cooperatives started disappearing. Not dramatically. Gradually. The way a road disappears when nobody maintains it. Now let's talk about Henry Ford. Henry Ford said, in 1925, I want to be precise here because the exact quote matters, that the fuel of the future was going to come from fruit, weeds, sawdust, almost anything. He said there was fuel in every bit of vegetable matter that could be fermented. He was not speaking philosophically. He was speaking as a manufacturer who had already built cars designed to run on ethanol, who had already grown hemp on his own property in Michigan, who had already commissioned research into plant-based plastics and fuels through his agricultural research program at his Dearborn farm. In 1941, Ford unveiled a car built largely from hemp-based composite panels. The body was pressed from a mixture of hemp fiber, flax, and other plant materials, formed under heat and pressure into panels that were, by Ford's own demonstration, stronger than steel at a fraction of the weight. A reporter at the event swung an axe at the rear fender. The axe bounced back. The panel didn't dent. The car ran on hemp ethanol. Ford wanted to grow fuel and materials on American farms. He said, more than once, that the farm was the factory of the future. He meant it literally. He had the engineering to back it up. By 1941, it was already too late. Here is what happened in 1937. And this is the part that took me the longest to piece together, because none of it is hidden exactly. It's all in the public record, in congressional testimony, in corporate filings, in newspaper archives. But it's scattered, and nobody goes looking unless they already suspect there's something to find. 4 sets of interests converged in Washington that year. Harry Anslinger ran the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He needed a mandate, a budget, an enemy. He had been watching alcohol prohibition collapse and understood that his bureau needed a new target to justify its existence. William Randolph Hearst owned newspapers and timber. He had invested heavily in wood pulp paper operations. Hemp produced paper of superior quality at lower cost per acre, and he knew it. The DuPont family had just patented nylon and a range of synthetic fibers derived from petrochemicals. Hemp fiber competed directly. Andrew Mellon was Secretary of the Treasury and the primary investor in Gulf Oil. His family's fortune was tied to petroleum. These 4 interests, operating through connections and lobbying that was not secret at the time but has been largely forgotten since, pushed through the Marihuana Tax Act of 1937. Notice the spelling of that word. Marijuana, not hemp, not cannabis. Not the name farmers had used for their crop for 100 years. The word was borrowed from Mexican slang, made to sound foreign and dangerous, specifically chosen so that a farmer reading the bill in his local paper would not recognize that it applied to the industrial crop in his field. That was not an accident. Congressional testimony at the time shows that when a representative of the American Medical Association stood up and pointed out that the bill would affect legal hemp cultivation, Anslinger's representatives told him he was wrong. He was not wrong. In the same year, 1937, the same 12 months, 2,000 filling stations across the Midwest that had been selling a fuel blend called agrol, made from grain and vegetable sources, shut down. Not because consumers rejected it. Because the pricing was manipulated, the tax incentives were lobbied away, and the agricultural cooperatives behind the network ran out of the capital needed to fight on every front at once. 2,000 stations. Gone in less than 2 years. I stood in my grandfather's barn trying to understand the timeline. His farming records go back to the 1920s. Hemp is listed as a rotation crop, plain as anything, right alongside corn and oats. Then, in 1937, the entries stop. Not just hemp, the whole character of the records changes. Fewer experiments, less variety, more tobacco, which he'd never grown before. I used to think he just changed his mind. He didn't change his mind. The law changed his options. The knowledge didn't disappear with him. It went onto shelves, into boxes, into old agronomy texts and state agricultural bulletins that nobody requested anymore. It sat there for decades while the infrastructure that would have made it practical got dismantled piece by piece. In February of 1938, 5 months after the Marijuana Tax Act had already passed, 5 months after the killing was done, Popular Mechanics published a feature article. The headline was "New Billion-Dollar Crop." It described industrial hemp as the most promising new agricultural commodity in America. It detailed the fiber applications, the fuel potential, the paper production, the building materials. It read like a report on the future. The editors didn't know the future had already been canceled. They were announcing a dawn that had just been legislated into darkness. The article ran. Nobody in Congress read it. Nobody needed to. The work was finished. I read that article standing in the barn where my grandfather's records ended. I read it twice. And the thing that got me, the thing that still gets me when I think about it, wasn't anger exactly. It was the specific sadness of watching people get excited about something that the people behind them had already decided to bury. The reporters at Popular Mechanics were not wrong. The University of Connecticut researchers were not wrong. Rudolf Diesel was not wrong. Henry Ford was not wrong. They were just inconvenient. I want to bring this back to the truck in my driveway, because everything I just told you, the history, the names, the legislation, none of it means anything if it stays in the past. History is only useful when it explains the present and changes what you do next. So let me tell you what I actually did, what I built, what I grew, what it cost, and what it produces. Real numbers, real steps. The kind of thing you can write on the back of an envelope and take out to your barn. I started small. Quarter acre, corner of the south field, soil that wasn't doing much anyway. I ordered certified industrial hemp seed, the kind rated below 0.3% THC, fully compliant with the 2018 Farm Bill, from a licensed seed supplier in Kentucky. The seeds arrived in a plain paper bag. I planted them the same way I plant anything else in that field. Hemp is not a delicate crop. It outcompetes weeds on its own, needs no pesticides in most climates, and fixes the soil reasonably well for whatever comes after it. By late summer, I had plants standing roughly 10 to 12 feet tall, thick-stalked, heavy with seed heads. I harvested the seeds first, cold-pressed them using a small screw press I bought second-hand for under $200. The press runs off a standard electric motor, nothing exotic, nothing you couldn't wire up yourself in an afternoon. One run through the press gave me oil, dark, dense, with a smell somewhere between grass and roasted grain. Not unpleasant, not what I expected. That oil went into the reactor. Now. The reactor sounds intimidating. It isn't. Mine is built from an old 40-gallon electric water heater, a small circulation pump salvaged from a broken dishwasher, a handful of fittings from the hardware store, and a basic temperature controller I ordered online for less than $30. Total material cost, including the water heater I bought at a salvage yard, $310. Plans for this exact setup, sometimes called a Appleseed reactor in the biodiesel community, are available free online, drawn up by hobbyists and small farmers who have been doing this quietly for 20 years. The process inside the reactor is called transesterification. Here is what that means in plain terms. You heat the hemp oil to about 130 degrees Fahrenheit. You mix methanol, the same methanol used in racing fuel and available at any farm supply store, with lye, which is sodium hydroxide, the same thing used to make soap. You combine this mixture with the heated oil in the right ratio, circulate it for about an hour, then let it settle overnight. In the morning, you have two distinct layers. The bottom layer is glycerol, thick, dark, useful for making soap, or as a livestock supplement, nothing wasted. The top layer is biodiesel, clear, amber-colored, ready to use. I drained it into the same fuel cans I use for everything else. Put it in the truck. The truck started. It ran. It still runs. 1/4 acre of hemp produced approximately 5 gallons of biodiesel from seed oil alone in my first season. That number sounds modest, and honestly, it is modest. Scaling matters here. One full